My name is Ava Carter. I'm 36 years old, and for a very long time, I truly believed I had the kind of life people post about, with captions like grateful and blessed. I had a husband, Ethan, who knew how I take my coffee and remembered the songs I played on repeat when we first met. I had a best friend, Sophie, who'd been at my side since freshman year. Sleepovers, shared apartments, job hunts, breakups, weddings, every version of me I've ever been. We were a triangle that felt untouchable, the partner I promised forever to, and the friend who knew all my befores. On Sundays, we rotated houses for dinner, laughing in familiar kitchens about the kind of small things that secretly hold a life together. Burnt garlic bread, a mismatched set of wine glasses, a playlist stuck on the same two songs. From the outside, people told us we were lucky. From the inside, I agreed. What I didn't know was that luck can look a lot like denial when you polish it enough. Here's the truth I never thought I'd say out loud. For 10 years, my husband and my best friend were living a second story behind my back. 10 years of texts that weren't meant for my eyes, of errands that ran a little too long, of smiles that lasted one beat past appropriate. 10 years where my ordinary became their opportunity. And I didn't learn it because I was clever or suspicious, or finally ready to connect the dots. I learned it at a funeral, standing in a black dress that didn't fit quite right after a week of not eating, clutching the program with white-knuckle fingers while lilies made the air too sweet to breathe. I learned it on a day meant for goodbyes, when I thought I was saying farewell to my best friend, and instead discovered I'd already lost her years ago. If you've ever been betrayed by the two people you built your world around, you know this isn't just about heartbreak. It's about disorientation. It's about waking up inside a home that looks like yours and realizing none of it is mapped the way you thought. It's about memory turning against you. Every birthday stack of Polaroids, every inside joke, every remember when. Now a mirror held at an angle you cannot unsee. People talk about rage or numbness. I felt both, layered like frost over fire. I wanted to scream until my throat bled, and also lie perfectly still and let the ceiling fall. But before the lilies and the eulogies, before the whispers and the glances, before the sentence that cracked the surface of my life in one clean line, there was us. There was the story I believed. I believed Ethan was steady. He wasn't flashy, not the grand gesture type. He was the bring you soup when you're sick type, the text me when you get home safe type, the set the thermostat before bed because you always forget type. We met at a friend's rooftop party in Brooklyn. String lights, warm beer, a view of the river that made everything seem possible. He asked about my work and actually listened. He remembered my favorite author and sent me a first edition on our 6-month anniversary with a note that said, "For the girl who underlines the quiet sentences." I saved that note in a box with ticket stubs and fortunes from cookies we pretended to believe in. I believed Sophie was the constant. She'd seen me at my best. New jobs, apartment upgrades, the first time I could afford a couch that wasn't a curb find, and at my worst, messy grief, failed interviews, the year my mother got sick. She was the person I texted first about everything, the person who told me when my lipstick was wrong for my skin tone, who made me leave the apartment when I'd been staring at the same wall too long. When Ethan proposed on a cold night in December, it was Sophie who knew before anyone else because I called her from the bathroom of the restaurant, hands shaking, laughing and sobbing into a paper towel, saying nothing but, "Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God." She screamed in my ear and then said, calm as breath, "Okay. We're going to plan the kind of wedding that still feels like you." And we did. She stood beside me in emerald silk, while I said vows I meant with my whole heart. I believed in the life we built from there. A 1-bedroom that became a 2-bedroom when promotions happened, and hand-me-down furniture got replaced one piece at a time. Sunday morning farmers markets, a plant I managed not to kill, a folder on my laptop called Someday with the names we liked and cities we might move to. Sophie lived 15 minutes away and had a key to our place for emergencies that sometimes meant delivering bad takeout and Netflix when my week had been too sharp around the edges. Holidays blurred into pictures. My arm looped through Ethan's, Sophie leaning into my shoulder. 3 smiles, 3 drinks raised, 3 people certain of each other. I used to joke that I didn't know who I'd miss more if I ever lost them. I didn't know I was already practicing. If you're listening to this and you're in the part of your story where everything still adds up, where the calendar is full of plans and the text threads are full of hearts, I need you to hear me. I am not here to make you suspicious of your kindness or cynical about your trust. I am here to tell you that illusion can be disciplined. It can be maintained like a schedule, fed like a pet, watered like a plant, kept alive with just enough attention to thrive while something else grows in its shade. I am here to say that sometimes the danger doesn't look like danger. It looks like familiarity. People ask, "Didn't you see it?" They want a neon sign, a smoking gun, a movie-style clue that would have saved me. But most betrayals I know don't announce themselves. They accumulate. They become a rhythm. A late meeting that used to be an early commute, a phone died that used to be sorry, I missed your call. The way someone says a name, soft, casual, practiced. If you're not looking for it, and I wasn't, you call it life. You call it busy. You call it tired. You call it nothing. And then one day you're in a black dress you bought because the other one felt wrong, standing in a room that smells like lilies and floor polish, listening to a man at a podium talk about the good a person did while you memorize the pattern in the carpet to keep yourself from dissolving. You are standing there, and someone leans in, someone who doesn't know the weight of what they're about to hand you, and says a sentence you will remember syllable by syllable for as long as you have breath. A sentence so ordinary it could have belonged to any Tuesday, and yet so specific it split my life into before and after. We will get there. I promise I will tell you every word and where I put my hands and how the world tilted 1 degree to the left and never tilted back. But I need you to understand the scaffolding first. The way we smiled for cameras, the way we traded recipes and playlists, the way Ethan kissed my temple in crowded rooms, the way Sophie texted me, home, when I stayed late at work. I need you to understand how a life can be so comfortably scripted that you stop noticing who's writing the lines. When I tell you that Sophie was my best friend, I don't mean the casual kind of friendship where you grab coffee twice a month and send birthday texts. I mean the kind of friendship that starts so young it feels sewn into your bones. We met when we were 14, both sitting in the back row of freshman English because neither of us had the nerve to raise our hands that first week. She had dark hair she refused to brush properly, and a notebook full of lyrics from bands I pretended not to like but secretly adored. She noticed the sketch on my folder, a clumsy drawing of a girl standing under a streetlight, and said, "You should show that to someone who'll actually get it." And just like that, something clicked. From that day forward, we were inseparable. We shared bus rides and homework answers, mixtapes labeled in Sharpie, and secrets we swore we'd never tell anyone else. We had our first heartbreaks at almost the same time. 2 boys who played on the soccer team, both too sure of themselves and not nearly careful enough with our feelings. We stayed up all night in Sophie's bedroom, eating stale chips and writing dramatic letters we'd never send. By morning, she read mine out loud in a fake Shakespeare voice until I laughed so hard my stomach ached. High school blurred into late-night diners, homecoming dresses we couldn't afford but bought anyway, and promises carved into the wood of the park bench near our houses. S plus A equals forever. We swore that whatever happened, no guy, no job, no move across the country would ever break us apart. And I believed her. When she said, "We'll be each other's constants," I thought it was a vow as binding as any marriage. College scattered us for a while, different campuses, different states. But we texted constantly, long paragraphs about professors we hated, roommates who stole food from the fridge, the creeping fear that maybe we weren't cut out for adulthood. She came to visit me the night before my 21st birthday, showed up with a bottle of cheap champagne and a crown from the party store that said, "Queen for a day." We stayed up till dawn on my dorm floor, eating vending machine snacks and talking about what we wanted in love. "Not perfect," Sophie said, chin resting on her knees, "but someone who stays. Someone who doesn't flinch when things get messy. Someone who makes it safe to breathe," I added, and she nodded like I'd said something profound. When Ethan entered the picture years later, Sophie was the first person I introduced him to. I remember how nervous I was, hands clammy, pulse racing, as if my future depended not just on whether he loved me, but whether she approved of him. I knew if Sophie saw red flags, if she whispered later that something didn't feel right, I would listen. I trusted her instincts as much as my own. That first dinner, I watched them laugh over some ridiculous story about me spilling coffee during a job interview, and I felt relief wash over me. They're getting along, I thought. This is perfect. This is what I always wanted. My husband and my best friend on the same page, part of the same circle. I didn't know it then, but that was the beginning of the trap. I thought their easy connection was a blessing. I thought it meant double the loyalty, double the safety. After Ethan and I married, Sophie was there for everything. She helped me pick the flowers, made sure my veil didn't snag on the church doors, held my hand before I walked down the aisle. Later, when we signed the marriage license, she laughed and said, "Well, Ava, looks like you've got 2 rings now. Your wedding ring and me, stuck to you for life." I smiled through tears because I believed it with my whole heart. The years that followed cemented the triangle we became. Sunday dinners at our place where Sophie brought dessert she baked from scratch, insisting on recipes that looked like they belonged in magazines. Summer barbecues where Ethan flipped burgers and she mixed drinks, teasing me about how little I could handle my liquor. Holidays where we exchanged gifts that proved how well we knew each other. The exact sweater I had pointed out in a shop window, the limited edition vinyl of Sophie's favorite band, the espresso machine Ethan had wanted but never bought for himself. We grew so used to being a trio that people outside almost didn't know how to place us. When coworkers asked about my weekend, I'd say, "Oh, we went hiking," and I meant Ethan, me, and Sophie. When family invited us to weddings or birthdays, I automatically included Sophie on the RSVP. Nobody questioned it. To them, she was practically family already, and for me, she was more than that. She was the person I called at 3 a.m. when I had a nightmare. The one who sat with me in hospital waiting rooms when my mother had surgery. The one who picked me up when my car broke down in the rain. Sophie knew the ugliest parts of me, the anger, the insecurity, the envy I tried to bury, and loved me anyway. That kind of love is rare. That kind of love I thought could never turn into something else, something darker. Looking back now, I see flashes I ignored. The way she hugged Ethan a little longer sometimes. The way their jokes sometimes excluded me, as if they had built a language I wasn't fluent in. The way she volunteered to help him with errands I didn't feel like doing. And I was grateful, because wasn't that what best friends do? Share the load? Be there when you can't? I told myself it was loyalty. I told myself it was proof of how close we all were. I told myself it was love, the safe, platonic kind. But the truth was already starting to rot beneath the surface. I didn't see it then. I couldn't, because I was too busy thanking the universe for giving me 2 people I thought would never hurt me. When I think back to the first time I met Ethan, I can still remember the little things that shouldn't matter, but somehow always do. The way the air smelled like roasted coffee and gasoline outside the tiny cafe where we bumped into each other. The fact that he wore a navy blue sweater with a hole at the cuff, and instead of being embarrassed, he joked that it was his good luck charm. He asked if I minded sharing a table since the place was crowded, and I said yes, even though my first instinct had been to say no. Something about the way he looked directly into my eyes made me feel seen, in a way I hadn't in years. At the time, I was working long hours at a job that drained me more than it inspired me. My days were spreadsheets, client calls, the kind of polite small talk that makes you forget your own voice. I had convinced myself that love was something for other people, something you catch young or stumble into by accident. But Ethan made me laugh before our coffees had even cooled. And when I told Sophie about him that night, she teased me mercilessly. "You're smiling through the phone, Ava." Don't even try to deny it. Our first official date wasn't glamorous. He took me to a little Italian restaurant with checkered tablecloths and a jukebox in the corner that only played old Sinatra songs. We split a plate of spaghetti like cliché characters in a movie, and when I knocked over my glass of wine from laughing too hard at one of his ridiculous stories, He didn't look annoyed. He just leaned across the table, took a napkin, and dabbed at the stain on my sleeve like it was the most natural thing in the world. That simple act of care, quiet, unpretentious, told me more than any bouquet of roses ever could. From then on, it was like gravity. We fell into each other's lives with a rhythm that felt both thrilling and inevitable. He learned how I liked my pancakes, burnt edges, almost crispy, and I learned that he couldn't stand silence when he drove, so his car was always filled with music. We had the kind of late-night talks that stretch until sunrise, voices hoarse from telling childhood stories, confessing fears, imagining futures, and through it all, Sophie was there. She was my sounding board when I wasn't sure if I was falling too fast, the one who helped me pick out outfits for dates, the one who listened to me gush about Ethan and said, "I've never heard you this happy. He's good for you." The night Ethan proposed, snow had just started falling, the kind that sparkles in the glow of streetlights. We were walking home from dinner, and he stopped under a tree where the branches were bare but laced with white. He fumbled with his pocket, clearly nervous, and I knew before he even spoke. When he knelt down, I gasped, covering my mouth, tears freezing on my cheeks before I even said yes. And here's the part that still twists in my chest when I think about it. Sophie was the very first person I called. I remember hiding in the restaurant bathroom, clutching my phone, whispering, "Oh my God, he asked me, Sophie, he asked me." She screamed so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear, then told me she was already opening champagne even though it was a Tuesday night. The wedding planning was chaos, but the beautiful kind. Sophie and I spent hours scrolling through Pinterest boards, making lists, tearing out magazine pages. Ethan mostly smiled and nodded, happy to let us take the reins. When the day finally came, Sophie stood beside me in a deep green dress, holding my bouquet when my hands shook too much to keep it steady. Ethan's vows were simple, not flowery, but every word was sincere. He promised to be my partner in everything, and I believed him. I believed every syllable. Our early married life was modest. A small apartment with creaky floors and a bathroom that steamed up so much during showers that I had to wipe the mirror with my hand just to see my reflection. But we were happy. We saved money by cooking at home, spent Sundays curled up on the couch watching old movies, laughed over burnt dinners and broken appliances. When we finally upgraded to a 2-bedroom in a better neighborhood, it felt like the world was opening its doors to us. And again, Sophie was there. She helped us paint walls, brought over pizza on moving day, and claimed the couch as her spot so often that neighbors started assuming she lived with us. And honestly, I loved that. I loved that the two most important people in my life weren't in competition, but in harmony. Holidays became traditions. Christmas mornings where Sophie came over in pajamas to open presents with us. Thanksgiving dinners where Ethan carved the turkey while she handled the mashed potatoes. Summer evenings where we grilled in the backyard, music spilling from portable speakers, laughter echoing into the night. We were a unit, and I thought that meant safety. But here's what I've learned. Sometimes the most dangerous thing isn't conflict. Sometimes it's comfort, because comfort makes you blind. Comfort convinces you that nothing could possibly go wrong. Comfort is what let me stand in my own kitchen, watching Sophie and Ethan laugh together over some private joke, and feel gratitude instead of suspicion. Comfort is what let me believe that I had found something rare. Two loves that didn't clash, but complemented each other. Looking back, I see the cracks. Tiny ones, hairline fractures you don't notice until the whole thing splits apart. The way Sophie sometimes stayed a little longer after I went to bed. The way Ethan seemed to light up when she entered the room. The way their banter sometimes flowed so naturally that I felt like the outsider in my own marriage. But at the time, I brushed it off, because I trusted them, because they were my safe people, because I had no reason to doubt. People always ask me after everything came out, "Didn't you see it? Didn't you notice the signs?" And the honest answer is yes and no. I saw things. I felt them in the pit of my stomach sometimes, that quiet tightening that tells you something is off. But I didn't let myself see them. Because when you love two people, your husband and your best friend, you train yourself to rewrite the script. You learn to call red flags bad lighting. It started small. Little things that felt ordinary at the time, like the night Sophie stayed late after helping me bake cupcakes for Ethan's birthday. I went upstairs early because I had work in the morning, and when I came back down to grab a glass of water, I found the two of them sitting shoulder to shoulder on the couch, laughing at something on his phone. They didn't notice me right away, and when they did, Ethan jumped a little like I'd startled him. Sophie just smiled and said, "We were looking at old memes." I laughed too, because why wouldn't I? But something about the way his thumb hovered over the screen, as if to close something quickly, stuck in my mind. Or the way Sophie started borrowing Ethan's hoodies. At first it was a joke. She'd show up on a cold night, grab one from the hook by the door, and say, "Your husband has better taste in loungewear than you, Ava." We laughed about it. She even posted a silly selfie once with Ethan's Ohio State hoodie, tagging me, "Stealing from the family closet." It seemed harmless. But later, when I did laundry and saw one of his sweatshirts folded into the wrong drawer, the drawer I knew Sophie sometimes borrowed clothes from when she crashed at our place, something tightened in my chest. There were dinners too, nights when I'd step into the kitchen for 5 minutes, and when I returned, I'd find them mid-whisper, only to straighten up quickly when they saw me. I'd tease them, "What's the secret?" And Sophie would roll her eyes, saying, "We're plotting your surprise party, obviously." I'd laugh because who wants to be the paranoid one? Who wants to admit that your best friend and your husband might have conversations that don't include you? But it wasn't just moments in our house. It was the way Ethan lit up when Sophie texted. I noticed once at dinner. His phone buzzed, and before I even glanced at my own, his eyes darted down, a quick smile tugging at his lips. When I asked who it was, he shrugged and said, "Just Sophie, asking about movie night." I nodded, because of course Sophie would text him. We were all close. But later, lying in bed, I couldn't help replaying that smile. It wasn't the casual grin of a friendly text. It was something warmer, something private. Then there was the night Sophie called when I was out of town for work. Ethan put her on speaker while we cooked dinner together over the phone. They laughed so hard about some inside joke that I felt like the third wheel in my own marriage. I even teased them, "You two don't need me here, do you?" Sophie shot back, "Oh, please, you're the glue. Without you, we'd just starve." Everyone laughed, and I forced a smile even though my chest ached in a way I didn't understand at the time. And yet, for every one of those moments, there was a reason to dismiss it. Sophie was like family. Ethan adored her because I adored her. Of course they were close. Wasn't that what I wanted? To have my two favorite people get along so well? I think the most dangerous thing in all of this was how I wanted it to be true. I wanted to believe that my world was perfect, that I had built something rare and unshakable. So when the cracks appeared, I filled them with excuses. When the whispers lingered, I called it friendship. When the smiles stretched too long, I told myself I was imagining things. There's one memory that haunts me more than the rest. It was a Sunday afternoon in the middle of summer. We'd had one of those lazy barbecues, burgers, music, neighbors dropping by. By the time evening came, most people had left, and I was cleaning up the kitchen while Ethan and Sophie sat outside on the porch swing. I could see them through the window, silhouettes against the orange sky. Their heads leaned together, too close, almost touching. At one point, she rested her hand briefly on his arm. It was a tiny gesture, the kind you could dismiss as comfort or affection between friends. But the intimacy of it made my stomach twist. I stood there with a dish towel in my hand, frozen. And then I shook my head, laughed at myself, and told my reflection in the window, "You're being paranoid. They love you. They would never." That's what I told myself, over and over again. And I believed it, because believing the lie was easier than facing the possibility of the truth. 10 years. When I think about that span of time, I can still feel my chest tighten. 10 years is an era. It's the change of addresses, the remodeling of homes, the vacations, the birthdays, the anniversaries. It's hundreds of photographs where we're smiling, holding glasses of wine, or carefully wrapped gifts. It's habits that feel eternal. Someone always forgets to turn off the bathroom light. Someone leaves the cap off the toothpaste. Someone puts the kettle on every evening, even when no one really wants tea. 10 years is the life you build brick by brick, believing the foundation is solid. Those 10 years felt like the most stable period of my life. From the outside, everything looked perfect. A marriage people described as happy, a friendship others envied. We traveled together, hosted dinners together, celebrated every holiday side by side. Neighbors would say, "You two have such a strong family." Friendships like that don't exist anymore. Colleagues would laugh, "Your friend is practically your sister. You're lucky." And I smiled, because I thought so too. Every day folded into a routine that felt cozy and predictable. In the mornings, I woke to the sound of Ethan making coffee, his always stronger, mine a little weaker. On Sundays, Sophie and I would go to the market, coming back with bags of vegetables and flowers she loved arranging in vases around the house. Evenings often ended with the three of us piled on the couch, arguing over which show to watch, dozing off under the same blanket. It was like a polished play. Each of us knew our role by heart. I was the wife, caring, loyal, grateful. Ethan was the husband, steady, calm, the one who could fix broken things and hold my hand when I doubted myself. Sophie was the friend, always present, always knowing the right words to make me laugh. Together we formed a closed circle, one I thought no one could ever break. But that play had a second script, one I didn't know existed. For me, those years were 10 years of love and trust. For them, they were 10 years of secret glances, of hidden meetings, of conversations never meant for my ears. I was living in one dimension, and they were living in another. Our worlds crossing only in photographs where all of us smiled the same wide smiles. I remember Ethan giving me jewelry for our wedding anniversary, while Sophie sat beside me clapping her hands, laughing, "Now you've got earrings for that dress." I thought, how lucky I am. A husband who knows my tastes, and a friend who's happier for me than I am for myself. Only later, after the funeral, I found an old message of hers to him. "You picked the perfect gift. She's thrilled. You always know what she needs." And I realized those words meant something very different than they had back then. All those years I chalked everything up to coincidences. If Ethan stayed late at work, I believed it was projects. If Sophie canceled plans, I told myself she was just busy. When they shared jokes I didn't get, I laughed anyway, because isn't that what friendship is? Inside jokes, little codes, languages you don't always translate. 10 years isn't just a number, it's a trap. Over that time, you get so used to trusting that you stop asking questions. And the scariest part is, you start to think that this is happiness. I lived in a world that felt ordered, steady, but that order was built on lies, and I didn't know that my calendar, my photo albums, my memories, every piece of them, was already poisoned by betrayal. That's the cruelty. You look at a picture from 10 years ago and realize you were smiling, while another story was already being written behind your back. 10 years of my life passed while I believed I had everything. And that's why the blow that came after hit with such devastating force. Funerals always feel like something distant, something that happens to other people. You know that death is part of life, but until you're standing in a black dress, until the air is thick with lilies mixed with candle wax, you can't understand the weight of it. The day of Sophie's funeral is carved into my memory. A gray sky, a thin drizzle that never became a storm, but still managed to seep into my hair and trickle down my collar. Black umbrellas rose above the crowd like a forest, bobbing slightly in the wind. I held one myself, but my fingers shook so badly that it kept swaying. I arrived earlier than most. I wanted a few minutes of silence, a private goodbye to the woman I'd called my second family. I stood by the closed casket, staring at the white roses laid carefully on top, and forced myself to remember her alive. Her laughter, her eyes, the way she said my name. Ethan came later. His footsteps on the stone slabs seemed too loud, like each strike of his shoes landed in my chest. His eyes were red, his hand squeezing mine when he whispered, "She was like a sister to me." I believed him. I gripped his fingers back, thinking we were mourning the same loss. But everything changed during the ceremony. as the priest spoke about Sophie's kindness, her loyalty, her light. I noticed a woman across the aisle watching me. She looked to be in her 50s, a shawl draped over her shoulders, and her stare was too direct, too knowing. It unsettled me. I turned away, telling myself I was imagining things. Then, after the final prayers, when people began to drift out, that woman approached me. Her voice was low, but every word landed sharp as a knife. "You must be Ava? Ethan's wife?" "Yes," I answered, confused. She lowered her eyes, then said, I always thought you knew." The words hit me like the ground itself had shifted. I always thought you knew. Knew what? I asked her again, but she shook her head quickly, as if realizing she'd revealed too much, and slipped away into the crowd. In that moment, the world around me blurred. The hum of voices, the smell of flowers, even the drizzle, all of it felt distant, muffled. I looked at Ethan standing a few feet away, speaking calmly with one of Sophie's co-workers, his face composed, his hands steady. But inside me, something cracked open. Pieces of memory began rushing back like fragments of glass. Late nights, private jokes, glances that lingered too long. Every coincidence I had brushed aside now cut like a blade. That woman hadn't told me the whole story, but she had handed me the key. And I already knew what door it unlocked. I barely remember the drive home. The silence in the car was heavier than the rain tapping against the windshield. Ethan's hands clutched the steering wheel too tightly. I stared at them and thought, were those the same hands that held her, that touched her hair? That typed messages while I slept beside him? The house felt foreign when we walked in. The photographs, the gifts, the furniture, even the mugs in the kitchen. They all seemed like props on a stage where I had been playing the wrong role. It wasn't my home anymore. It was the set of a story I didn't know I was part of. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the kitchen, listening to the clock tick, forcing myself to replay every detail of the past years. Every laugh, every glance, every whispered conversation I wasn't part of. The more I remembered, the more the truth settled in. I didn't need her to spell it out. The answer was already here, heavy in the air, buried in the walls, etched into my memories. The funeral was supposed to be a goodbye to my best friend. Instead, it became the moment I realized I was losing my husband too. After the funeral, the house no longer felt like mine. Every corner carried a question I was too afraid to answer. I found myself pacing the rooms at night, unable to stop my mind from replaying that woman's words. "I always thought you knew." Those 5 syllables were poison, seeping through my veins, infecting every memory I once held dear. At first I told myself I needed proof, that I couldn't throw away 10 years of marriage and 20 years of friendship over a stranger's cryptic comment. But proof doesn't always come in neat packages. Sometimes it's 1,000 little fragments waiting for you to finally notice, and once you start looking, you can't stop. The first piece came unexpectedly. I was cleaning up in the study, sorting through old boxes of Sophie's things that she'd left at our place over the years. Journals, books, a sweater she never picked up. At the bottom of one box was an envelope, yellowed at the edges. No return address. My heart raced as I slid my finger under the flap. Inside was a card, simple, no signature, just a few words written in Ethan's handwriting. "Thank you for being my safe place." My breath caught. I wanted to believe it was innocent. Maybe he had written it for me, and it somehow ended up here. But the ink, the curve of his letters, I knew that script. And I knew he had never given me that card. After that, I couldn't stop. I searched through drawers, through closets, through the hidden corners of our life. It felt shameful, like I was betraying them by digging for secrets. But hadn't they betrayed me first? One night when Ethan was asleep, I crept downstairs and took his phone from the counter. My hands shook so hard I almost dropped it. I knew his passcode. It was my birthday. That felt cruel in itself, like a twisted joke. The messages were gone, deleted. At first I thought I was imagining things, but the empty spaces were proof enough. The threads with Sophie were too clean, too polished, too scrubbed. No history stretching back years, as there should have been between people who spoke almost daily. Only a few recent exchanges, shallow and sterile. My stomach churned. Then I found the hidden album in his photos. Not many pictures, but enough. A shot of Sophie's hand holding a glass of wine. Intimate, too close, not something you'd send to a sister. Another of the two of them at a cafe, heads bent together, smiling. I wasn't there. I hadn't even known that cafe existed. The worst one was blurry, almost accidental. Ethan's shirt collar visible. Sophie's face half turned toward him, her lips inches away from his. It wasn't staged, it wasn't posed. It was real. And it was enough. I dropped the phone on the counter and pressed my hands against my mouth to keep from screaming. My whole body shook. The room tilted. I thought I might faint. 10 years. And here was the truth staring back at me from a glowing screen at 2 a.m. I wanted to wake him right then, to shove the phone in his face and demand answers. But something stopped me. Maybe it was fear of hearing the confirmation out loud. Fear of watching him deny it with the same mouth that had once sworn to love me forever. Or maybe it was exhaustion, the kind that seeps into your bones after years of lies you didn't know you were carrying. So I waited until morning. When he came down for coffee, I sat at the table with the phone in front of me. My hands were steady now, but my voice was cold when I said, "Ethan, we need to talk." He froze, just for a second, but I saw it. The flicker in his eyes, the way his shoulders stiffened. He knew. Before I even opened the photos, before I said Sophie's name, he knew. I slid the phone across the table. "How long?" I asked. My voice was flat, like it belonged to someone else. He didn't answer. His jaw clenched. His fingers drummed on the table once, twice before he pulled them into fists. 10 years, I whispered, because now I could finally say it out loud. 10 years, Ethan. Was it worth it? He tried at first to spin it, to call me paranoid, to say the photos meant nothing. But I wasn't the woman I had been before the funeral. I didn't back down. I didn't laugh it off. I pushed and pushed until the lies cracked. And then, finally, he broke. "I never meant for it to go this far," he muttered, eyes fixed on the floor. "It just happened." The words were like acid. 10 years of betrayal, and all he had to offer was, "It just happened." In that moment, the last pieces of me shattered. I realized I hadn't only lost Sophie at her funeral. I had lost my husband, my marriage, my trust, my very sense of reality, and I would never get them back. The moment the words left his mouth, it just happened. I felt something inside me snap. 10 years of lies, reduced to a shrug, to a careless phrase. 10 years of stolen moments, of whispers in the dark, of laughter behind my back, all swept into a single excuse. I slammed my hand on the table so hard the coffee cup rattled. "Don't you dare!" I hissed, my voice trembling, not from fear, but from rage. "Don't you dare tell me it just happened." 10 years, Ethan. 10 years isn't an accident. 10 years is a choice you made every single day. He lifted his head then, eyes wide, face pale. For the first time, I saw fear in him. Not guilt, not sorrow, fear, and maybe a flicker of relief, as though carrying the secret for so long had finally broken him too. "Ava," he whispered, reaching out across the table. His hand hovered inches from mine. "I loved you. I still love you, but Sophie, she was—" I yanked my hand away before he could touch me. The very thought of his skin on mine made me sick. "Don't you dare say her name like that," I spat. "She was my best friend. She was my sister. And you—" My throat tightened, but I forced the words out. "You ruined both of them in one breath." His shoulders slumped. He rubbed his face with both hands, dragging them down as though trying to peel the guilt off his skin. It wasn't supposed to happen. That night, the first time. We were drinking, we were talking about you, how much you meant to both of us. One thing led to another, and I laughed then. A sharp, bitter sound that didn't sound like it belonged to me. "Oh, that's rich," So you betrayed me out of love for me? That's your story? He flinched but pressed on. After that, we didn't mean to keep it going. We tried to stop, Ava. We tried. But you didn't, I cut in, my voice a blade. You didn't stop. Not after one time. Not after 1 year. Not after 5. You let it become a second life. You came home to me, kissed me goodnight, looked me in the eye every morning, while sneaking off to her. Don't talk to me about trying. Tears filled his eyes then. And for a moment I thought I might feel pity. But pity is impossible when your chest feels hollow, when your very memories have been stolen. He wiped his face with the heel of his hand, his voice cracking. I loved you both. That sentence broke me in a different way. Because it wasn't just betrayal. It was competition I had never signed up for. He hadn't chosen me. He hadn't chosen her. He had chosen himself, living in a world where he could have both, where I was too blind, or too trusting, to see. I pushed back from the table, the chair scraping against the floor. My legs were shaking, but I forced myself to stand tall. You don't get to say that, I said quietly, almost calmly now. Love doesn't look like this. Love doesn't stab you in the back for 10 years, and then ask for forgiveness. Love doesn't bury the truth until the day of a funeral. He rose too, his hands out as though I might collapse. Please, Ava, don't throw this away. We can fix it. We can go to counseling. We can... That word, fix, set fire to my veins. I took a step back, shaking my head. Fix? Ethan, you don't fix 10 years of betrayal with therapy sessions and apologies. You can't patch over a marriage that was built on lies. The life we had, it's gone. It died with Sophie. Maybe it died even before that, and I was just too blind to see it. Silence filled the kitchen then, broken only by the faint hum of the refrigerator. He stared at me like he didn't recognize the woman standing in front of him. And maybe he didn't, because I wasn't the same woman anymore. For 10 years I had been loyal, trusting, naive. For 10 years I believed I was loved. But in that moment, standing in the ruins of my marriage, I finally saw the truth. The man I thought I knew never existed. The marriage I thought I had was an illusion. And the life I thought I'd built? It wasn't mine. It was theirs. The days after the confrontation blurred together like one long, gray stretch of time. I moved through them in a haze, my body going through the motions while my mind felt as though it had been ripped apart and scattered. The house, once my sanctuary, had become unbearable. Every corner, every wall carried their fingerprints. The couch where we had watched movies, the kitchen where we had cooked together, the bed where I had fallen asleep beside him, believing I was safe. Nothing felt untouched. Nothing felt mine. Ethan tried to act as though life could continue. He lingered in the kitchen when I made coffee, asking if I wanted him to drive me to work. He left notes on the counter that said, "We'll get through this," or "I love you, Ava." Each word felt like poison. I ripped them up, one by one, until the trash bin overflowed with scraps of paper. At night, he slept on the couch. I didn't tell him to, but he seemed to understand that the space beside me was no longer his. Sometimes I heard him crying in the dark, muffling the sound into a pillow. And though a part of me once might have run to comfort him, now I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my heart as cold as stone. What surprised me most was the anger. I had expected sorrow, heartbreak, despair. And yes, those were there, heavy and suffocating. But beneath them burned a rage I had never known I was capable of. Rage that I had wasted 10 years. Rage that my trust had been treated like garbage. Rage that Sophie, my best friend, my sister in everything but blood, had died before I could even look her in the eye and scream at her for what she had done. The betrayal didn't end with the two of them. It spread outward like cracks in glass. My family, who had adored Ethan, now looked at me with pity when I told them the truth. My mother whispered, "Maybe you can forgive him. Maybe people make mistakes." And I nearly screamed. Mistakes are spilled drinks, forgotten anniversaries, harsh words said in anger, 10 years of lies is not a mistake. It is a second life built in the shadows of your own. Friends were divided too. Some shook their heads in disbelief, swearing they'd never suspected a thing. Others were quieter, their silence almost accusatory, and I couldn't help but wonder, did they know? Did they ever suspect and choose not to tell me? The paranoia gnawed at me. Suddenly, I trusted no one. I began avoiding places that reminded me of them. The Italian restaurant where Ethan proposed. The park where Sophie and I once spent whole afternoons lying in the grass, talking about our futures. Even the grocery store felt tainted because I could picture them walking down the aisles, laughing while I was at work. My entire city had become a map of betrayal, and so I started planning my escape. It wasn't easy. The thought of tearing apart a marriage, of dismantling a life we had built brick by brick, was terrifying. But staying was worse. Staying meant living every day with ghosts that would never leave. Staying meant dying slowly, suffocated by lies. One night, while Ethan was asleep on the couch, I sat at the dining table with my laptop open. I looked up apartments. I looked up divorce lawyers. My hands shook as I typed, but for the first time since the funeral, I felt something close to clarity. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was taking steps to reclaim my life. The first real crack between us came when I told him I wanted him out. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply stood in the living room, arms crossed, and said, "You need to leave. This house is no longer ours. It's mine. And you don't belong here anymore." His face went pale. He begged, pleaded. He said things like, "We can rebuild, and don't throw away everything we had." But the truth is, he had thrown it away a long time ago. I was only just now sweeping up the ashes. When he finally packed his bags, the silence that followed was deafening. The house was emptier than it had ever been, but for the first time, that emptiness felt honest. No more secrets lurking in the walls, no more lies humming under the surface, just me, my grief, and the slow, painful process of healing. The aftermath was not clean. It was messy, filled with tears and sleepless nights, with moments where I almost called him just to fill the silence. But each time I reminded myself of the photos, the card, the woman at the funeral. Each time I reminded myself that the man I thought I loved never truly existed, and so I began to rebuild. Not for him, not for Sophie, not even for the life I thought I had lost, but for me, because the only way to survive 10 years of betrayal is to finally start living for yourself. The first morning after Ethan left, I woke up to silence. No sound of his footsteps in the hallway, no clink of mugs in the kitchen, no soft hum of his voice saying, "Morning, Ava." For a moment the silence felt unbearable, a weight pressing down on me. But as I sat up in bed, the sunlight cutting across the room, I realized it wasn't just silence. It was space. Space that finally belonged to me. In the weeks that followed, I began piecing myself back together. It wasn't pretty. Healing never is. Some days I cried until my throat burned, my tears soaking the pillow like an ocean I thought I'd never escape. Other days I felt nothing at all, just a hollow numbness, like someone had turned off all the switches inside me. But there were also small victories. The first time I laughed without forcing it. The first night I slept through until morning. The first day I looked in the mirror and didn't see a broken woman, but someone who had survived the unimaginable. I threw myself into rebuilding. At first it was practical things, meeting with a lawyer, dividing assets, changing passwords, sorting through boxes of Ethan's belongings, and deciding what to keep and what to burn. Each step was brutal, but each step was also freedom. Every drawer I emptied, every paper I signed was like taking another chain off my body. Then came the harder part, rebuilding myself. I started therapy. At first, I didn't even know what to say. I sat in the chair, hands clenched, staring at the floor. But slowly, words came. Rage, grief, shame, betrayal. They all spilled out, layer by layer. My therapist told me something I'll never forget. Betrayal doesn't define you, Ava, but how you choose to live afterward does. So I began choosing differently. I went back to places I had avoided. The Italian restaurant where Ethan proposed. The park where Sophie and I had once dreamed about our futures. At first, my chest ached just walking past them, as though the memories themselves were knives. But little by little, I created new ones. I ordered my favorite dish alone at that restaurant and savored every bite. I lay in the grass at the park with a book and let the sun warm my skin. I learned that places don't hold power, people do. And if those people betrayed me, then the power was mine to take back. I reconnected with friends I had neglected, the ones outside of the triangle I had been trapped in for so long. They welcomed me with open arms, with late-night wine and laughter, with reminders that I was not alone. Some of them admitted they had always wondered about Ethan and Sophie, but hadn't wanted to interfere. That hurt, but I understood. People are afraid of breaking illusions, even when those illusions are killing you. And slowly, I built new routines. Sunday mornings became mine alone. Coffee in bed, a walk through the farmer's market, fresh flowers on the kitchen table. Not because Sophie liked them, but because I did. I signed up for a pottery class, something I had wanted for years but never made time for. I even adopted a dog, a scruffy rescue with mismatched ears who followed me around the house like he knew I needed someone to remind me how to love again. One night, months later, I stood in my living room and looked around. The photographs had changed. The furniture was rearranged. The air felt lighter, freer. For the first time in a long time, the house didn't feel haunted. It felt like home. My home. Do I still think of them? Of course. You don't erase a decade overnight. Sometimes memories sneak up on me. An old song on the radio, the smell of her perfume, the sight of a man in a navy sweater that looks too much like his. And for a moment, the wound throbs again. But then I remind myself, I lived through it. I am still here. And I am no longer defined by what they did to me. The betrayal will always be a part of my story, but it will never be the whole story. The whole story is that I found strength I didn't know I had, that I stood in the ashes of my old life and decided to build something new, that I chose myself finally after 10 years of choosing everyone else. So yes, I lost my husband, I lost my best friend, I lost the life I thought I had, but I gained something greater. I gained myself. And that, more than anything, is the real beginning.